And welcome back to live election coverage of Democracy 2012. I'm Teresa Marchetta, live from our 7 News studios. We are in the Call 7 Strategy Center tonight with a panel of live guests, experts in Colorado politics to give us perspective on these races, not only nationally but locally as the results come in. We also have a real-time results center in the studio next door to bring us perspective on the results as well. Let me introduce the guests that we have with us this evening. We have B.J. Nickel, Representative B.J. Nickel, the current House Minority Whip, is here. Thank you for being with us. We have Terrence Carroll, former Speaker of the State House and Democratic perspective for us tonight. Peter Hansen is here, Assistant Poli-Sci Professor from DU. Thanks for being here, Peter. Rick Ritter is here, former presidential campaign manager also. So you can tell we have a very esteemed staff, and I want to say thank you all for spending election night with us and for our Colorado viewers. It's a privilege to have all of you here. And BJ, let me start with you. I know we've all been kind of excited with different different races that we're watching in this election. What are you paying particular attention to tonight?
Well, I'm paying particular attention to, I think, the House and Senate races here in Colorado. Obviously, there may be a shift of the balance of powers here in the state of Colorado, depending on what happens. If currently the Republicans hold the House, Democrats hold the Senate, and of course we have the governor who's a Democrat. But depending on the outcome tonight, there could be a switch. So I'm watching that, watching a couple of the congressional races with Perlmutter and Kaufman. And then, of course, the presidential race, which could also affect what happens with the House and Senate races here in Colorado.
And certainly the redistricting issues have come into play in those races, so I'm sure we'll talk about how that has impacted tonight's election as well. Terrence Carroll, what are you watching tonight?
Much like BJ, I'm watching the State House and State Senate races. That's going to be interesting. One thing that a lot of folks haven't paid much attention to, except just as a point of humor, I guess, to a certain degree, is Amendment 64. All the rest of the country is watching to see what happens with Amendment 64. And then there's some down ballot or down ticket issues. For instance, all the mill levy and bond initiatives in the various school districts in the metro area. It's terribly important considering the state of our funding for public education in this state.
And definitely important, especially to local Denver voters, but Amendment 64, we have a reporter out there who's telling us that we're seeing journalists from across the country here in Colorado following that. So we'll definitely have to break that down as well. Peter Hansen, I know that you have commented on a wide breadth of topics, but tell me what in particular tonight has piqued your interest.
Well, I'm especially interested in the presidential race and whether or not Colorado will end up playing the pivotal role that we thought it might. Right now, in order to answer that question, we're going to have to see how the races in Florida and Ohio go. And depending on how those races go, will determine whether or not it's Colorado's vote that will determine who will win the election tonight.
And Rick Ritter, of course, I heard we were just commenting before we came out on camera, will Colorado play a role tonight or not? And you've been looking at Florida tonight. Talk about that, and then also what else you're watching as the results come in.
I'm looking at Florida, I'm looking at Virginia to see which way particularly independent voters are breaking in those two pivotal states and what it tells us in terms of what we might expect here in Colorado. I'm also looking at sort of vote behavior in Jefferson County. Much has been made in national news that this is the swing county in the swing state. So I'll be taking a special look at not only the presidential, but state Senate and state House races here in Jefferson County as well as in Arapahoe County.
I know we're so eager to get the returns tonight with the polls just closing a short time ago because, as you mentioned at the very beginning, there has been some redistricting issues. We're looking at a balance of power issue. So BJ, talk about that and talk about how this is going to affect Coloradans specifically. This is a very important election for many reasons.
Well, redistricting really did affect the House and Senate districts here in Colorado, and it made the districts more competitive. And so as a result, we have incumbents who may not necessarily be safe, whereas they once before. So they have to do it a little more hard campaigning to try to get the outcome that they want to see. And so as a result, we may end up with a difference in the balance of powers because of that.
And I know a lot of the early polling really showed a plus or minus one on either side with balance of power for Colorado. Terrence, comment on that. What is your feeling? Is that pretty accurate? Do you think it's going to be pretty tight? And tell me about the races in particular that you think may swing it one way or the other.
I think it is going to be very tight for the rest of the night with the State House and State Senate races. I think the Senate will probably stay Democratic. The question of the night is what's going to happen in the House. And there's some key races there. You have 2 races down in Colorado Springs. You have House District 17 down in Colorado Springs, and you also have House District 18. Those both could, one's already held by a Democrat, one could be taken over by a Democrat. And then you have all the Jefferson County races, essentially, House District 47, House District 59, and as Rick said, Jefferson County is going to be the bellwether for what happens in the State House. And then there's one interesting race way down in southeastern Colorado, and was it House District 60?
61.
No, actually, no, that's a Senate race, but House District 61,
Right.
with a 3-way race between Millie Hamner, the incumbent unaffiliated Kathleen Curry, who's a former state rep, and the Republican candidate. We'll see how that plays out.
And let's also talk a little bit, Peter, about, you were talking about, Terrence mentioned the Jefferson County ballot and how those races go. Talk about what you see in terms of that county's importance statewide.
Well, I think one of the reasons Jefferson County is interesting is because first, it's got an enormous number of people, and second, it has a very large number of independent voters. So independent voters have been the group that's most persuadable in this election. So again, looking to see how they break in Jefferson County and Arapahoe County, I think will tell us which way Colorado is going in this race.
And we've been checking also throughout the evening here at 7 News about how many folks have cast their ballots, and I think earlier the Secretary of State released that we'd broken the 2 million mark. And when you look at this breakdown, much can be said about the purple status of Colorado, but you're talking really close numbers here between Republicans just over 675,000, Democrats 642, and then with those unaffiliated that you mentioned, well over 500,000. And so is that voting bloc becoming, Rick, I'll put this to you, even more critical, not just in Colorado, but nationally?
Absolutely. I mean, we are seeing a dramatic change in voting behavior across this country. And when we look at something such as women voters and independent voters, these are the type of subgroups that really are driving the political agenda. And one of the things I want to look at is, as we get some of the exit research, how did they break on issues of concern here in Colorado as well as nationally?
And I know that we haven't had a lot of local numbers yet, but looking at some of the national numbers that we've all been kind of following, and any of you can answer this, any surprises in terms of the way the states are going in the presidential election, or has it been pretty much as anticipated?
Pretty much as anticipated, I think, so far.
Although I do think Florida's a bit of a surprise that Obama has that emerging lead in Florida, considering the Romney campaign just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, was fairly confident that they had Florida won.
I think Terrence is exactly right. I think a week ago we would have said that Mitt Romney would win Florida relatively easily. Tonight it's neck and neck. I think what that indicates is that Barack Obama has been rising in the polls over the last few days. It's put him in a very competitive state in Florida and well positions him in states where he had more of a lead to begin with.
And I would argue North Carolina has yet to be called, and many people would put that in the Romney column. And similarly, on the other side, Virginia is very close, and there were those who said, look, Northern Virginia has been one of the few places in this country which has truly benefited from an expansion of government, just simply because of employment. And yet the numbers from Northern Virginia have yet to come through at the solid levels that might be expected for Barack Obama.
I got slipped some numbers here that I want to throw out to all of you. Early numbers from Jefferson County showing a majority at this point going for Obama. What we're seeing here is 130,838 votes for President Obama in Jefferson County so far, and Governor Romney with 121,932. Thoughts on that?
Let me make I was just pulled that up. There's a couple of things that are fascinating about this. One is that over 251,000 voters in Jefferson County must have had early vote or vote by mail, and there's 327,000 active voters. So that's an indication that almost two-thirds, almost 70% of the voters, the active voters, did in fact use those vehicles to vote. It also says 3% differential is a lot for the governor to make up at this time.
And just to add in there from a state perspective, I mean, that changes the dynamic for how we look at what's going to happen with the state house and state senate races in Jefferson County, because there are some close races. For instance, the Senate race there between Andy Kerr and
Ken Summers.
Ken Summers, thank you.
You're a good team, you two. Okay, good. Yeah.
We've always
There are a
worked
lot,
well
we've got a lot of
together.
races. We've got a lot of races to track.
Don't worry about the partisan divide here.
There we go. Hey, well, Terrence and RJ, you were talking about, everyone's addressed this issue, but you're saying these particular races, now that you're getting some of these presidential numbers in Jefferson County, you're thinking that's going to potentially help you call these races in Jefferson County.
It'll definitely affect the downline races. So the other House candidates that are in that district are also Max Tyler, who's running against Rick Enstrom, and so that may favor him. It may hurt Robert Ramirez, who's a Republican incumbent in that district, and then there's an open seat, Brittany Pedersen and Amy Atwood, so it'll certainly affect that race as well.
Is that a bit of a surprise, folks, the early numbers from Jeffco, or is this something of what we were
And to
anticipating?
buttress what we're talking about, Ed Perlmutter leads by 16,000 votes over Joe Kors on the in what might be considered the more conservative area of his congressional district.
Well, we want to get back to you. We'll let you get into our iPads, and we'll get back into some of those numbers. Let's take it back into the 7 News studios with anchors Ann Trujillo and Mike Landis. Guys, they're having fun in here. This is some interesting perspective on these races.
Always a lot of fun to hear from the folks that are right in the middle of the thick of it, you know, and they give you that inside look. Thanks so much, Teresa.
Yeah, great conversation. Yeah, and we've been working here in the studio with our iPads as well.
Yes,
There's
yes.
a lot going on, a lot to watch, a lot of numbers to crunch here.